The sun was beginning to hide behind the mountains, casting a golden glow over the treetops. I was there, at the entrance of Shenandoah National Forest, taking a deep breath and trying to absorb the tranquility I sought. The cool breeze wrapped around me, but the feeling of peace was fleeting. The recent loss of my father still weighed heavily on my heart, like an anchor preventing me from floating. Just a walk to clear my mind, I thought as I followed the main trail. As I distanced myself from the sounds of the city, the birds sang, and the rustling of the leaves reminded me that nature was alive. But as I delved deeper into the forest, the sounds became stranger. Whispers, a soft, distant voice, as if someone were calling my name. Lucas, Lucas. The echo seemed to come from all directions, and I stopped, my heart racing. "Who's there?" I asked, but the only response was the sudden silence of the birds. A shiver ran down my spine, and I turned quickly, expecting to see someone. The forest was silent, except for the distant sound of the wind. "It's just your imagination, Lucas," I murmured to myself, trying to convince myself. But the feeling of being watched persisted, a chilling presence I could almost feel around me. I continued walking, deciding it was better to ignore it. "Just a little farther, and then I'll turn back," I promised myself. The trail grew narrower, and the trees seemed to close in around me. It was as if I were being swallowed by the forest. In a moment of distraction, I looked down, watching the dry leaves under my feet, and when I looked up again, I saw something moving between the trees. A shadow. I was overcome by a sense of dread, and my instinct screamed at me to run. "Calm down, Lucas. It's just a shadow," I stammered, but the voice wasn't convincing. Fear began to consume me. I didn't know if it was the forest or if my grief over my father was playing tricks on me. He always said that nature has its own stories, I remembered, trying to find comfort in the memories. But the whispers returned like a lament, and this time they were clearer, more urgent. "Lucas, come." I stopped again, breathless. "Why are you calling me?" I yelled, but the only answer was the sound of the wind among the leaves. An oppressive silence fell over me, and the feeling that I wasn't alone intensified. The desire to go home began to mix with curiosity. "What do you want from me?" I asked, no longer knowing if the question was directed at the shadow or to myself. The forest felt alive, as if it were waiting for something. I could feel the energy pulsing, and with every step I took, the weight of the presence behind me grew. It was like being in a labyrinth, where every turn led me deeper into an unknown place, far from the safety of what I knew. I needed answers, but at the same time, a primal fear told me to turn back. Maybe I should just leave, I thought, but before I could take a step, the whispers intensified, and I heard my name again. "Lucas." This time, the voice sounded clearer, closer. I looked back once more, feeling adrenaline coursing through my veins. A biting cold enveloped me, and the shadow seemed to grow larger, as if it were about to reveal itself. "If there's something you want, show yourself," I shouted, bravery mixed with desperation. The echo of my voice was lost in the forest, and the only response was silence. But the cold remained, and the shadow continued to follow me, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. What I had started as a walk to find peace was now becoming a maze of mysteries and fears I couldn't comprehend. As I walked deeper into the forest, the atmosphere began to change. The air, which had been fresh and invigorating, now felt heavy, as if each breath were a struggle against something invisible. The sun, which could barely penetrate the thick canopy of leaves, seemed to hide, casting long, distorted shadows around me. It was then that I spotted an old fallen tree, its wood worn and covered in moss. It was an imposing sight, almost like a monument to a forgotten story. As I approached, I noticed that the tree was marked with strange inscriptions. They were symbols I did not recognize, but they seemed to pulse with an energy of their own. What could this mean? I murmured to myself, running my fingers over one of the deep marks. A shiver ran down my spine, and a feeling that I shouldn't be there began to settle in my chest. As I examined the inscriptions, the whispers returned, louder and more urgent. Lucas, Lucas. It was as if the forest itself was calling my name, and a wave of dread rose in my throat. I looked around, expecting to find someone, but the only thing I saw was the gloom between the trees. It's just your imagination, I tried to convince myself, but the pressure in my chest did not lessen. Then the shadow. I saw it quick and stealthy, moving between the trunks of the trees. My heart raced. Who's there? I yelled, my voice echoing among the shadows, but only silence responded. A part of me wanted to run, but another part was paralyzed by curiosity and fear. Maybe it's just an animal, I thought, but the feeling that something supernatural was lurking was undeniable. I decided to step away from the tree, but with each step I took, I felt the presence drawing closer. You're just scaring yourself with nonsense, Lucas, I told myself, trying to calm the turmoil inside me. But the whisper turned into a lament, a sad melody that seemed to touch my memories. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice choked. The wind rustled the leaves around me, and I realized that the forest seemed alive, reacting to my distress. I'm not a coward, I exclaimed, trying to regain some control over the situation. If you want to show me something, do it. The echo of my voice faded, and silence settled again, so deep that I could hear my own heartbeat. The shadow, now closer, appeared as a blur on the edge of my vision, and I turned abruptly, but there was nothing. What's happening to me? I thought as adrenaline coursed through my veins. I decided I needed to move on, no matter what was following me. I began to walk faster, the path becoming a serpentine trail of anxiety and despair. Every crack of a twig under my feet seemed amplified, and I could feel the presence trailing me, like a cunning wolf that knew its prey was vulnerable. You can't catch me, I shouted, trying to challenge the shadow. But instead of a response, the whispers turned into screams, a chorus of voices that seemed to mix with the wind, becoming a haunting lament. Lucas, come back, don't go. Panic took over me. I needed to escape, but where to? The forest, which once seemed like a refuge, now appeared as a labyrinth with no exit. I looked back one last time and for a brief moment saw a figure among the trees, indistinct but clearly human. The expression on its face was one of despair, and I knew deep down that this figure was connected to me in some way. Who are you? I shouted, but the shadow vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only an echo of my own fear. A feeling that I was about to discover something terrible began to form in my mind, but the only thing I could do was keep walking, anxious and aimless, as the forest grew increasingly oppressive around me. The fog wrapped around the forest like a heavy cloak, making each step a challenge. The sensation of being watched grew with each moment, as if the very trunks of the trees were spying on me. I decided that if I wanted to understand what was happening, I needed to go deeper. Maybe I'll find answers, I murmured to myself, trying to push away the fear that nestled in my chest. As I moved away from the main path, the whispers began again, clearer and more insistent. Lucas, Lucas. The voice seemed to echo among the trees, calling me, pulling me further away from any safety. I stopped, letting the silence take over for a moment, trying to discern if it was just my mind playing tricks. But the atmosphere was dense, charged with a palpable energy that I couldn't ignore. As I delved deeper, I spotted something in the distance. An abandoned cabin, covered in moss and with broken windows, as if it were waiting for someone who would never return. What is this? I thought, feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension. I approached cautiously, each step echoing within me like a call. The air was cold, and a chill ran down my spine as the wind blew, bringing with it a faint whisper. I entered the cabin, the creaking door breaking the sepulchral silence. The interior was dark, with daylight barely managing to penetrate through the cracks. What caught my attention were the photos on the walls. Some were familiar, portraits of a past that seemed distant, yet I knew well. There were images of birthdays, family gatherings, and soon I recognized my father, young and smiling. But there were also old photos I didn't remember, unknown faces that seemed to watch me with an unsettling intensity. "Who are they?" I murmured, running my fingers over the dusty frames. Upon touching one of them, a wave of emotions hit me, and I realized that the faces were connected to something I couldn't comprehend. A feeling of loss and sadness enveloped me like a fog. As I stepped away from the photos, a strange sensation of being watched overtook me again. I looked through the broken window, and the mist seemed denser, as if it were alive, wrapping around the cabin and isolating me from the outside world. I need to get out of here, I thought, but before I could take the first step, I heard a noise behind me. A quick movement, almost imperceptible, but it made my heart race. "Who's there?" My voice came out weaker than I expected. The response was deep silence, and the mist seemed to flow closer, as if feeding off my fear. Panic took over me, and I turned to the door. As soon as I put one foot outside, the shadow that had been following me became more present, a palpable presence I could almost feel on my skin. Adrenaline surged, and I ran, my feet pounding against the leaf-covered ground, trying to escape that oppressive feeling. "It can't catch me, it can't," I repeated to myself, but each step felt heavier than the last. Looking back, I saw the shadow moving quickly among the trees, an indistinct figure, but clearly focused on me. "Are you following me?" I shouted. "What do you want from me?" But the forest only responded with the sound of the wind, as if mocking my despair. With each moment, the shadow drew closer, and the feeling of being about to be touched became unbearable. With my heart in my throat, I left the cabin behind and got lost in the mist. The fear was paralyzing, but there was a part of me desperate to understand what was happening. Why is this happening? I asked myself, unable to find an answer. The forest, once a refuge, was now becoming a prison. What was this shadow? What did it want from me? I felt that the answers were hidden there, in the depths of that forest, and that I couldn't escape until I discovered them. The coldness of the presence enveloped me, and I knew time was running out. With each breath, I felt the shadow was closer, as if it were ready to reveal to me the secrets I feared to face. The cold water of the lake enveloped me like a shroud of terror. The impact took my breath away, and for a moment, the world around me dissipated into a murky fog. I lay there, immersed, trying to process the avalanche of emotions that assaulted me. When I finally managed to rise, the surface of the lake became a mirror of memories I would have preferred to leave behind. The shadow, now closer than ever, seemed to dance among the trees, and I felt it was time to confront it. The memory of the story my grandmother told about a family curse echoed in my mind like a mantra. A dark pact, something that had been sealed in remote times, left me restless. I took a deep breath, trying to gather courage. "Why are you haunting me?" I shouted, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. "What do you want from me?" The forest did not answer. The whisper of the winds in the leaves was the only sound breaking the silence, as if the elements themselves were waiting for the revelation. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat echoing the sense of urgency. The shadow remained there, motionless, but its presence was palpable, like a promise of answers I did not yet understand. "If you are a part of me, then show yourself," I demanded, the tone of my voice rising in desperation. "Stop playing and tell me what you want." For a brief moment, Everything fell silent again, and then, as if the forest itself had exhaled a deep sigh, the shadow began to take shape. A familiar figure slowly emerged from the void. My heart stopped. It was her, my mother. Her gaze was sad, almost melancholic. "Lucas," she whispered, and her form seemed to fade and reconstitute, like a reflection in turbulent water. I wanted to run to her, but a paralyzing anguish stopped me. "What happened to you? Why are you here?" I asked, my voice choked. "You need to understand, my son. The pain and secrets you carry, they cannot be ignored." The echo of her voice seemed to resonate around me, and I struggled to comprehend. "The forest holds much of our past, Lucas. What happened to your mother was not just an accident." "No, it can't be true. I don't want to believe it," I shouted, feeling despair take hold of me. "What are you trying to tell me?" She hesitated, her expression twisting in a mix of love and sadness. "The curse, it feeds on grief, on regret. The choice you make now will affect not only you, but our entire lineage." Her words were like icy blades piercing my heart, and the truth I feared began to unfold in my mind. "What choice? What do I have to do?" I asked, a mix of confusion and anger rising within me. "Why did you leave me? Why didn't you fight?" "I did what I could, but the past cannot be changed. You need to face the truth, Lucas. What is hidden in the shadows, what you ignore, that is what binds you here." Her figure began to fragment, and I felt the urgency to grasp her, to bring her back. "No, don't leave me like this," I shouted, reaching out my hand, but she seemed to slip between my fingers like fine sand. "Confront the pain, my son. Face the shadow within you." And with that, she disappeared, leaving only a trail of light that quickly faded, like a dream dissolving at dawn. I fell to my knees, tears streaming down my face. Despair enveloped me, and the forest seemed to spin around me. What was I supposed to do now? The shadow was still there, but it was not just the figure I feared. It was the representation of everything I did not want to face. My guilt, my grief, the tragedy surrounding my family. "I don't know how to face this," I murmured to the darkness, but I knew there was no escaping. The forest, in its ancient wisdom, awaited my decision. The echo of my mother still resonated in my mind, and I felt I was on the edge of an abyss, about to take the next step toward the truth. The shadow before me pulsed with an intensity one had never felt before. The air around me grew dense, as if the forest itself was breathing in unison with that presence. I looked at the figure that had become the image of my mother, her pale and sad face reflecting a pain I did not understand. "Mom?" My voice came out as a whisper, almost a plea for help. I wanted to reach her, embrace her, and at the same time, I feared what that connection might reveal. She didn't respond, but her eyes, filled with despair and hurt, seemed to call to me. "Lucas!" Her voice resonated, but it wasn't the voice I remembered. It was more like a lost echo, heavy with sadness. I wanted to believe she was there to help me, but the shadow around her seemed to expand, swallowing the light of day. "What do you want from me?" I asked, feeling that each word was an exposed weakness. "You need to understand," she murmured, but her words were lost in the breeze passing through the trees. Fear gripped me again, and I realized that this shadow was not what it seemed. It was the manifestation of my pain, my regrets, and as I tried to connect with the image of my mother, I was pulled into the darkness of the forest. I struggled against it, but the force was irresistible. "Lucas, choose." A voice echoed like thunder inside me. It was my father's voice. I wasn't sure how he had arrived there, but it was as if he were watching me from somewhere, perhaps from a safe place, far from that darkness. The despair and confusion in my mind intensified. "Choose what?" I shouted, anguish reverberating in each word. Choose between facing your past or succumbing to the pain that consumes you. His voice was clear, but what did it mean? What was there in my past that I had yet to confront? The shadow before me writhed, and I realized that its forms were changing, becoming more distorted, more grotesque. It was a representation of my darkest memories, the guilt I carried for not being able to save my mother. "You can't escape what you feel, Lucas," the shadow screamed, its voice now echoing in unison with the trees. "You are part of all this. The pain you hide is what keeps me here." And suddenly, the forest around me began to transform. The trees became shadowy figures, their foliage seeming like hands reaching out to me, as if trying to trap me. "No," I shouted, pulling away from my mother's figure, which was now becoming indistinct, blending with the darkness. "I am not this. I am not the guilt you imposed on me." And in that moment, I realized that the true shadow was not the figure I saw, but the pain I carried within me, the weight of unresolved guilt and grief. "You need to break free, Lucas," my father's voice echoed again, and I felt a wave of determination rise inside me. I fought against the darkness that surrounded me, wanting to pull me back. "I can't let this consume me." I closed my eyes and, with all the strength I could muster, visualized the light of love I had always felt for my family. When I opened my eyes again, the shadow seemed to hesitate, its form oscillating between my mother's figure and a nebulous, threatening mass. "You cannot hold me anymore," I declared, and the force of my shout reverberated throughout the forest. The darkness around me began to dissipate, revealing glimpses of happy memories, laughter, and moments I had buried. But before I could breathe a sigh of relief, the shadow transformed into something even more horrifying, an entity that reflected not only my pain, but also the dark secrets of my lineage. I realized that the true threat was not just the shadow, but the curse that loomed over my family, and that I was about to unveil. "Lucas," my father's voice echoed once more, but now it was a distant call. "You need to be strong. Your family's legacy depends on you." And as the darkness closed in, I knew my journey was far from over. It was a path I had to face, and the forest was more alive than ever, ready to reveal the mysteries surrounding my lineage and the essence of the pain I had always carried.